All right, how's it going? I was asked by my good friend Mike B to make a video on the tarot and divination. So that's what we're going to do today. Before we can cover that, I think it's important to cover the basis of what tarot seems to be, and that is archetypes and symbolism. And what is an archetype? Well, an archetype is essentially it's a distilled aspect of consciousness. That's one way to think about it. It's also been the greater arcana, the major arcana, have also been described as memes of consciousness. That's another good way of thinking about it. Um, so essentially, we are working with archetypes and combinations of potential, um, which leads to what is divination? Is divination predicting the past or predicting the future? Yes and no. It is to some extent, but it's important to not get caught up in how true or how accurate that information can be, because things are always changing. What I use divination for more so for myself and for my clientele is it's more like a Rorschach blot. It's like a Rorschach test. If you take an ink blot and you fold it on a piece of paper, and you open it up, the first thing that you see, if you see a fountain, that says something about your conscious state. If you see an upside down volcano, that says something else. If you see a bundle of wheat that are tied and bound by rope, these all say different things. So when one person looks at the Fool, they see and feel and hear one thing. But when somebody else looks at that same card, they witness something else entirely. So then you might ask, well, how is reading even accurate if it's different from person to person? Well, you learn to come into attunement with the part of yourself that doesn't react immediately to the meaning of the cards that are attributed in all of the books and stuff. And you sort of find the similar wavelength that the information is on. Another way to explain what divination is, and this is a good segue into why tarot is structured the way that it is. Existence in a lot of traditions is described as being built up by at least 4 worlds. There is, in the Kabbalistic tradition, we'll speak Kabbalistically since we're going over tarot. Tarot and Kabbalah have a pretty, they're like, they go hand in hand. Kabbalistically speaking, there are the 4 worlds, which are the world of fire, Atziluth. Then there's the world of water, which is Bria. Then there's the world of air, which is Yetzirah. And then there's the world of earth, which is Asya. And we are here, most of us are here in the world of Asya. And a lot of people's consciousness is Asiatic in nature. You could argue that the intellect goes up into Yetzirah, but most people aren't concerned with that on a day-to-day basis. But the way that things work, the way that things manifest, is they come down from the higher world. So before anything can happen, before anything physical can happen, it happens on a quantum level. It happens on a molecular level, and then it builds up. It builds up from a subtle nature to a gross nature, and then it happens and as it manifests. This is one reason why thoughts affect reality. Moving on, things happen at a subtle level before they happen at a material level. And where you tap in, where you in my opinion, should be tapping in for divination is at a more subtle level of vibration, where parts of you or your faculties or spirits that you're coming into contact with are a part of that more subtle plane, that more subtle realm or world. And so by opening yourself up and by accessing your different clarities, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, etc., then you become aware of these subtle vibrations, essentially. So now moving into tarot and the structure of tarot. Basically, you have you could break the tarot up into a lot of different ways, but we'll start from a more macrocosmic perspective, which is the two sections. I won't call them halves because they're not halves, but the two sections. There's the greater arcana and the lesser arcana, or the major arcana and the minor arcana. The major arcana relates to the world of spirit and the different manifestations of it. It relates to the it's a more archetypal section. It's the more archetypal section of the tarot. It shows what's going on in the world around you. It shows what's going on with greater circumstances that are coming into affect the world. Whereas the lesser arcana, you could say that the lesser arcana is subjective and that the greater arcana is objective. That's one way to look at it. So when you move into the lesser arcana, which is the other 56 cards when you take out the greater arcana, the lesser arcana relate to the four worlds. The suits relate to the wands, relate to fire. Different traditions will attribute different elements to different suits, but generally it's going to be wands relate to fire, cups relate to water, swords relate to air, and pinnacles relate to earth. So that relates to the four layers of our being as well. That relates to our archetypal, the consciousness of Atziluth. It relates to, our creative world, the world of Yetzirah. That's different cards relate to different parts of the being. You might have something happening materially. How do you know whether something is happening in the reading materially or whether it's happening spiritually? The cards will tell you that. And with the elements come sub-elements as well, which is the difference between the court cards. And the court cards are the more personal cards. Court, to me, relates to heart, core. Anyway, the court cards are perhaps the most personal cards, which is why a lot of times people will pick a court card as a significator for the querent. And I'm no expert on tarot, by the way. This has been my approach over the last several years. We get into the sub elements and we get into individual symbolism of the cards. So we could talk about how the court cards themselves are made up of pairings of elements. So where the wand represents fire in one system, and the queen might represent water in another system, each suit has an elemental attribution or correspondence, and each tier, each page, princess, queen, king, however you want to look at it, each one of those has an elemental attribution as well. And so that affects the reading whenever you get into dignitaries. And the dignitaries are where, if you draw a lot of wands, like if you draw 2 wands and 2 cups, that's like it's ill-dignified, which means it's almost like a reversal in a reading, which some people don't even do reversals in their readings. They just read the dignitaries. They read how dignified the cards are. More about the structure. The major arcana, the greater arcana, relate to the 22 paths on the tree of life as well. So that's useful for path working. You can meditate on the symbolism of the card to actually come into contact with those parts of your psyche, to grow them and manifest them, explore, and, you know, exercise and whatnot. So aside from the structure of the tarot, there's the utility of it as well, which is the individual symbolism of the cards. I came across something which to me is interesting, which is I had been meditating on a single card, which a lot of people are instructed to do, meditate on a single card when you're just starting out in a lot of systems. And I noticed that there was individual symbolism on the cards. Sometimes someone was holding a scepter, sometimes someone was holding a club, sometimes someone had a horse, sometimes someone was sitting on a throne. And something in me, it was so long ago, I don't remember if it was a whisper or if it was an image. I think I remember now. I think I saw stones dropping on the card, on the plate. I have this like wooden plate that I was meditating on the card, just so it could have I might have had a candle or something on there as well. It was a long time ago. And I was meditating on this, and I just saw stones, quartz or something maybe falling on them. And it was apparent to me that it was significant where those stones landed, whether they landed on the club or the horse. And that was sort of like a Rorschach moment for me. And that's when I really realized that tarot could also be used as subconscious reflection as well. And then when I went to think about, well, what kind of stones am I going to use, I immediately saw rune stones, you know, your typical Elder Futhark rune stones. And I developed a practice for divination that I shared. I also write an article weekly, sometimes, let's say semi-weekly, on the Occult Mirror Forum that covers that practice in detail. But the point is that each card has so much individual symbolism that, in my mind, you don't need to pull 7 or 11 cards. Some people do. Some people have been doing this for 30 or 40 years, and they pull one card and they have meditated on the symbolism for 30 years, and they can flash through it like that. But for someone who's only been reading for 10 years or so, or maybe less, there's so much symbolism in one card that if you really, really have your clarities turned on, one card can tell you about someone's entire past. One card can tell you about someone's entire present situation. And one card can tell you about someone's entire future. And for some people, that's enough. Knowing that is enough for some. Another method that you can do is, I guess this is going to be on my channel as well, which tends to be a left-hand channel as well, that covers more of the Qliphothic exploration, perhaps the more meditative side of the practice. One thing that I also do is, aside from Linda Filorio's Shadow Tarot, when I'm meditating on the tunnels, I will also take my natal chart, and I have a printout of my natal chart and I've cut it out on cardstock. I will set one of the regular, cards, not the non-Linda Florio, you can use whatever tarot cards you want, right? You can use the Waite Smith, you can use the, what is it, I'm looking right at it, the Thoth Tarot, Harris, Crowley Harris deck. You can use whatever deck you want. Those are the two most common, probably. I also like the Tarot of Ceremonial Magic. I also like the Night Sun Tarot. Use any deck you want, but what you do is you take the major arcana the Greater Arcana, and I invert it and I put it on at the very center of my natal chart, and then I have a printout of the Linda Florio Shadow Tarot, and then I put it upright, and then I will sort of just gaze on those cards and pay attention to what happens, basically. Pay attention to what happens psychically, and become aware of the changes that happen in your life over the next week or so. I recommend staying in a tunnel or a sphere for at least a week, if not a month. Notice the changes that occur as you meditate on that reversed image. That's another thing that you can do. Let's see if I can think about anything else. Remember that the Greater Arcana, the Major Arcana, the first 22 trumps, you can think about it as 21 as well, because there's really only one card in the deck. There's 78 pieces to a puzzle that makes one card, and it's the Fool. It's you. It's me. We're the Fool. This is our journey. We don't know who we are to some degree. We don't know why we're here to some degree. We don't know where we are to some degree. Yeah, you can say that you live in Alabama on Earth in the Milky Way, but where the fuck is the Milky Way? We have no idea where we are. We have no idea who we are. We have no idea why we're here. We're the Fool. This is our journey. And I recommend meditating on each card. Start with the Fool. What does it mean? How are you the Fool in your life? Positively and negatively. How are you ready to just be on an adventure at any time with nothing but a flower and some belongings and, a barking companion, How are you that? If you're not like that, how could you be more like that? But also the converse of that. How are you the Fool? What are you missing in your life? What are your shortcomings? And work on that. And then once you feel like you've made progress there, move to the Magician. And this can be a 22-day meditation for you, or this can be a 22-year meditation for you. The point is that there's a lot of power in these cards. Whether you're using them for external purposes or whether you're using them for internal purposes, or both. There's a lot of power in these cards. Currently, the deck that I like to use is the Alchemy 1977 England Tarot. And it's not just because I have small hands. These cards have beautiful imagery, and there's just something about the symbolism in them. There's something ancient. The cards are very medieval in their design, I'll say. Here's the mage or the magician here. I'll share that one with you guys. It's one of my favorite sets. It's interesting that I looked for a card to show, and this was the one that came out. But yeah, this is the back sides of the cards as well. It's pretty cool, I think. So, unless I can think of anything else to share, I think that's it. Thanks for listening.